What if the most powerful empire in human history was deleted from your textbooks simply because of the color of its kings? Why is the world so terrified of the Black Pharaohs who didn't just rule Egypt, but saved it from itself? Today, we are peeling back the layers of a great amnesia to reveal the hidden pharaohs of Kush, the lion kings of the south who challenged heaven, mastered the stars, and forged a legacy of iron and gold that modern science is only just beginning to decode. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a spiritual restoration of a truth that was buried under the Sudanese sands for 3,000 years. We're about to dive deep into a forbidden timeline where warrior queens defied Rome and blue-skinned gods walked the Nile. If you're ready to hear the secrets the official storytellers are too afraid to mention, hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and tell me in the comments, from which corner of the world are you listening to this ancestral awakening? The eclipse is over. Let the revelation begin. In the shadows of Jebel Barkal, the sacred mountain the ancients called the throne of Ammon, the wind doesn't just blow. It whispers names that modern historians, in their cozy, air-conditioned offices, would rather ignore. It's funny how science becomes conveniently selective when it bumps into a black empire that made late Egypt look like a decaying province, isn't it? Here, the soil isn't just dirt. It's a golden dust archive where every grain holds the echo of a royal command that the Sudanese sands tried and failed to suffocate under the weight of forced forgetting. The mystery kicks off right where official cartography fails, at the heart of the Third Cataract, where the Nile's waters turn as wild as the spirit of a warrior who refuses chains. While the world was busy staring north at the Giza pyramids, which were already getting a bit old and tired by then, a new power was simmering in the south, forged in iron and absolute faith. This wasn't textbook wisdom. It was a deep, raw knowledge coming straight from the earth's blood, an energy the priests of Napata guarded like the last breath of a god the rest of the world decided to ghost. This journey isn't made of paper, but of visions that burn the eyelids of anyone daring to look back without the filters of mental colonization. Picture the scent of myrrh and sweat mingling with the metallic tang of gold mines, where every nugget unearthed was seen as a fragment of the sun that needed to return to its rightful owner. The conflict here was invisible, a silent tug-of-war between the spiritual purity of Kush and the corruption of Egyptian dynasties who'd sold their souls to mercenaries and fast-food deities of convenience. The spiritual revelation radiating from these stones was simple, yet far too dangerous for the history books. Divinity has no color, but the power that invoked it was as dark and deep as ebony. PA, the lion who would emerge from these lands, wasn't just looking for real estate. He was looking to restore a cosmic order that had been trashed by those who thought the throne was a political toy. He felt it in his bones. Unification wasn't an expansion project. It was a necessary exorcism to scrub the Nile Valley clean of its own decadence. As we wrap up this first awakening, we're left standing on the edge of a river that seems to flow backward, defying the logic of European maps that tried to claim the South was down in every sense of the word. Official history loves to skip this chapter, maybe because they're terrified that the roar of Napata can still be heard in today's halls of power. But truth is a seed that cracks even the hardest marble. And as the first shadows of Paye's army begin to stretch across the horizon, a specific vision starts to crystallize in the king's mind. Paye didn't wake up one day and decide to conquer Egypt just for the sake of a bigger crown. He was summoned by a force that doesn't care about borders or mortal egos. In the heart of the temple of Napata, shrouded in a blue smoke that smelled of ancient resins and forgotten rituals, the Hidden One reached out. It's almost ironic that while the northern kings were busy squabbling over taxes and trade, the real power was being handed over in a dark sanctuary where the sun only touched the ground once a year. The revelation wasn't a whisper. It was a roar that vibrated through the limestone walls, a divine "enough is enough" directed at the chaos unfolding in the north. Imagine the king kneeling, his skin glistening with sacred oils, as he received a mandate that would make modern geopolitics look like a playground dispute. He was told that the gods had abandoned the temples of Memphis and Thebes because the people there had traded their spirit for shiny trinkets and foreign flattery, a classic case of forgetting who you are once you get a bit too comfortable. The symbolic journey began within his own mind. a spiritual mapping of a kingdom that had lost its way, stretching from the confluence of the Niles all the way to the Mediterranean. He saw the Nile not as a river, but as a vein that had become clogged with the impurities of those who didn't respect the ancient ways. To P, this wasn't an invasion, it was a pilgrimage of fire, a holy necessity to reconnect the head of the serpent with its tail, ensuring the life force of Africa could flow without being diluted by outside interference. Spiritually, this moment marked the birth of a protector, a man who believed he was the literal shadow of God on earth, tasked with a cleanup job of epic proportions. There's something deeply real, and perhaps a bit uncomfortable for some, about a ruler who moves not out of greed, but out of a terrifyingly pure conviction. He wasn't interested in being a tyrant. He wanted to be a mirror, reflecting the original glory of a civilization that had started to rot from the head down, reminding everyone that the source of their power was much further south than they dared to admit. As Paye rose from the temple floor, the air in Napata seemed to thicken with the weight of an impending storm, one that wouldn't bring rain, but change. The priests watched in silence, knowing that the Lion of the South was no longer just a man, but a vessel for an ancestral grudge that had been brewing for centuries. The horses were already being groomed, and the ships were being readied. But before a single spear was sharpened, a very specific ritual of war had to be performed, one that would link his soldiers to the stars themselves. In the ancient world, gold wasn't just a shiny metal for jewelry. It was considered the literal flesh of the gods, and Kush was sitting on the biggest pharmacy in the world. It's quite a joke how modern textbooks act like the Egyptians were the only masterminds of wealth, while the Kushites were basically the ones supplying the bank. Deep in the scorching deserts of the Nubian Shield, the earth bled yellow, providing a spiritual currency that made the surrounding nations look like they were playing with pocket change. The mystery of this wealth wasn't in the quantity, but in its ritualistic extraction, where miners sang hymns to the earth before daring to scratch its skin. Imagine the blinding glare of the sun hitting mountains of raw ore, a sight so intense it was said to blind the unworthy, who looked at it with greed rather than reverence. This gold was heavy with spiritual intent, destined to be hammered into breastplates and crowns that acted as antennas for the divine, rather than just trophies for a vault. Culturally, this gold created a bridge between the physical and the metaphysical, a conductive path for the energy of the ancestors to remain grounded in the material realm. The Kushites didn't just trade it, they wore it as a shield of light, believing that a king covered in the sun's metal could never be touched by the shadows of deceit. It was a visual language of power that screamed authority before a word was even spoken, a reality that the civilized world today still tries to quantify while missing the magic entirely. Spiritually, the gold served as a constant reminder that the true value of a kingdom lay in its connection to the core of the planet. Every ingot cast in the furnaces of Napata was stamped with symbols of protection, ensuring that even when the gold traveled to the north, it carried the virus of Kushite sovereignty with it. It was a silent infiltration, a way of ensuring that wherever there was wealth in the Nile Valley, there was a piece of the southern spirit making itself at home. As the coffers of the Lion King overflowed, the gold began to transform from a resource into a weapon of psychological warfare. The sight of a Kushite envoy draped in more gold than an Egyptian pharaoh could dream of sent a clear message. The impoverished South was actually the source of all things precious. But wealth alone doesn't win a holy war. And as the golden armies began their march, they carried with them a stone that held a secret much heavier than any metal, a decree that would change the maps forever. When Paye finally decided to move, he didn't just send a message. He carved his intentions into a massive block of granite, creating what we might call the world's first diss track against mediocrity. It's hilarious, really, how historians marvel at the gentlemanly way he conquered, as if he were just being polite, when in reality he was asserting a moral superiority that made his enemies look like lost children. This stone wasn't just a record, it was a psychological anchor dropped into the heart of a sinking civilization, proving that the pen, or the chisel, is indeed mightier than the sword if you have the gods on your side. The mystery of the stele lies in its brutal honesty, detailing how Paye stayed on his ship, refusing to even look at the unclean northern kings until they had properly purified themselves. Imagine the sheer audacity. An African king from the deep south treating the lords of Egypt like unruly toddlers who forgot to wash behind their ears before dinner. He narrated his victories not with the bloodthirsty gore typical of the era, but with a tone of disappointed fatherhood, as if he were merely tidying up a messy room that someone else had trashed. This wasn't just a military campaign. It was a cultural reset that emphasized a code of honor the world has largely forgotten. While his rivals were busy betraying each other for a slice of the Delta, PA was busy pardoning those who showed genuine remorse, a move that probably confused the hell out of the Machiavellian plotters of the North. He used the stele to broadcast a new kind of power, one based on ma'at or cosmic balance, showing that true strength doesn't need to be cruel when it's backed by an undeniable truth. Spiritually, the stele acted as a talisman, a physical manifestation of the word of Amun rendered indestructible in stone. It whispered a dangerous secret, that a ruler's legitimacy doesn't come from his army, but from his alignment with the ancestral laws of the land. By documenting his refusal to loot or destroy, PA set a spiritual trap for history. He made it impossible for future scholars to paint him as a mere barbarian, though many certainly tried their best to smudge the ink of his legacy. As the inscriptions reached their final lines, the stone stood as a sentinel of a new era, a permanent reminder that the Nile now flowed under a single, dark, and divine hand. But even as the ink, or rather the shadows in the carvings, dried, a new symbol was being forged to sit atop the king's brow. This wasn't the single snake of a vassal, but a twin-headed terror that would signal a sovereignty so absolute, it would make the stars themselves blink in surprise. In the world of ancient power dressing, nothing said "I'm the boss" quite like the crown. But PA wasn't satisfied with the status quo. He did something that probably gave the traditionalists in the North a collective heart attack. He doubled down on the snake. It's almost comical how modern experts brush this off as a minor fashion choice, when in reality it was a geopolitical middle finger to anyone who thought Kush was just a footnote. That second cobra on his forehead wasn't just for show. It was a declaration that the two lands were no longer a northern monopoly. The mystery of this double serpent lies in its hidden frequency, a visual code for a sovereignty that bridged the gap between the physical world and the spirit realm. Imagine the king walking into a room, the flickering torchlight catching those two golden cobras, making them look like they were actually breathing. It was a psychological masterstroke. One snake represented the traditional power of Egypt, but the second one, that was the raw, unyielding power of Kush, coiled and ready to strike anyone who dared suggest the Black Pharaohs were mere placeholders. This symbolic journey into the Double Crown territory was a masterclass in cultural reclaiming. For centuries, the North had looked down on the South, but now the South was literally wearing the North's pride alongside its own. It was a fusion of identities that many found terrifying, because it proved that the edges of the world had become the center. PA wasn't just wearing a crown, he was wearing a map of a unified Africa, showing that when you bring the strength of the source to the sophistication of the Delta, you get something unstoppable. Spiritually, the two serpents were believed to be living guardians that spat fire at the king's enemies, acting as a divine security system for his third eye. This wasn't just mythology to them. It was a biological reality of leadership where the king's aura was amplified by these golden antennas. It suggested that a true ruler needs two eyes to see the world, one for the visible politics of men, and one for the invisible currents of the gods, a balance that modern leaders couldn't find with a GPS and a prayer book. As the image of the twin serpents began to appear on statues from the Mediterranean to the depths of the Sudan, the message was clear. The eclipse of Kush was now total. But while the king's brow was guarded by gold and venom, the true test of his legacy wouldn't be found in his jewelry. It was waiting in the architecture of the afterlife, in a place where the pyramids took on a sharper, more aggressive angle, pointing toward a destiny that the sands of time are still trying to bury. While the world obsessed over the Big Three in Giza, the Black Pharaohs were busy building a forest of stone in the desert that looked like it belonged to another planet. It's a bit rich, isn't it? How mainstream archaeology treats these as miniatures or imitations, when they actually have a sharper, more aggressive angle, like stone daggers pointing straight at the throat of heaven. These weren't built by a dying culture. They were the architectural manifestation of a comeback story that lasted for 1,000 years after the northern kings had already turned to dust. The mystery of Meroe lies in its sheer defiance. Over 200 pyramids rising from the orange sands of Sudan, far outnumbering anything the Egyptians ever managed. Imagine the sound of thousands of laborers, not slaves, but craftsmen, carving the very bones of the earth to create these steep-sided transit stations for the soul. They weren't just tombs, they were sophisticated machines designed to capture the first rays of the sun, acting as spiritual batteries for an empire that refused to let its fire be extinguished by the passage of time. This cultural journey into the sharpened afterlife represented a break from the past, a unique Kushite evolution that blended the old ways with a raw southern energy. The interior walls were covered in reliefs of queens who looked like they could crush a Roman legion with a glance, and kings who spoke to gods as equals. It's a visual slap in the face to anyone who thinks history is a straight line of progress from the south to the north. Here, the south was refining the science of eternity on its own terms. Spiritually, these pyramids served as portals, needles that sewed the earth to the sky, ensuring that the lineage of the Black Pharaohs remained anchored in the stars. The orientation of these structures suggests a deep, almost frighteningly accurate knowledge of astronomy that didn't need a telescope to map the cosmos. They believed that by sharpening the angle of the stone, the spirit could ascend faster, bypassing the bureaucracy of the afterlife to sit directly at the table of the ancestors. As the wind howls between these narrow stone giants, you can almost hear the laughter of the builders echoing through the corridors of time. They knew that one day, people would come with shovels and cameras, trying to solve them like a crossword puzzle, while missing the point entirely. But as impressive as these stone needles are, the true secret of their durability wasn't in the mortar or the rock, but in a technological edge that the civilized world of the time wasn't ready to handle, the secret of the iron. While the rest of the Mediterranean was still fumbling with bronze tools that bent like lukewarm wax, the people of Kush were busy turning their capital into the Birmingham of Africa. It's actually quite amusing how history books gloss over the fact that Meroe was a massive industrial powerhouse, a soot-stained metropolis of fire and metal. Archaeologists found slag heaps so large they were mistaken for natural hills, remnants of a technological leap that the civilized world usually likes to claim for itself, centuries later and thousands of miles away. The mystery of this iron wasn't just in the chemistry, but in the spiritual alchemy required to pull strength from the red earth. Imagine the roar of the bellows and the rhythmic thumping of hammers, a sound that the ancients believed was the heartbeat of the god Ptah himself. They weren't just making spears, they were forging the very backbone of an empire, creating a black metal that was considered a gift from the celestial smiths, a substance so hard it could slice through foreign shields as if they were made of papyrus. This industrial journey was a masterclass in self-sufficiency, turning a desert kingdom into an impenetrable fortress of technology. The smoke from the Meroitic furnaces could be seen for miles, a dark pillar of cloud that served as a warning to any would-be invaders. Here lies a people who have mastered the element of fire. It was a cultural middle finger to the idea of the primitive South, proving that while others were writing poetry about war, the Kushites were busy perfecting the hardware that actually won it. Spiritually, the forge was a sacred space, a womb of transformation where the raw, chaotic energy of the earth was refined into order and purpose. The smiths were more than just laborers. They were high-ranking initiates who understood that to master iron, one had to first master their own internal fire. They believed that every blade forged in Meroe carried a spark of the ancestors, a spiritual edge that ensured the weapon would never fail its wielder as long as their heart remained heavy with justice. As the fires of Meroe eventually cooled and the great slag heaps were reclaimed by the shifting sands, the secret of their super metal didn't just vanish, it migrated. The knowledge of the furnace and the hammer flowed into the heart of the continent, seeding the great civilizations of the interior with the power to shape their own destiny. But even as their iron conquered the earth, A much more ancient and feminine power was rising to ensure that the spirit of Kush would never be forgotten, the era of the Kandakes. In a world where most great civilizations treated women like decorative furniture or political pawns, the Kushites decided to follow a much more logical path. They put them in charge. It's hilariously telling how Roman chroniclers, those bastards of patriarchy, were absolutely terrified by the Candace queens, often describing them as one-eyed, bloodthirsty giants. In reality, these women were the Kandakes, the fierce queen mothers who didn't just rule from a throne, but led armies into the thick of battle, while the so-called enlightened men of the north were still debating if women had souls. The mystery of the Kandake lies in her dual nature. She was both the ultimate nurturing mother and the most ruthless destroyer of her enemies. Imagine a woman draped in kilos of gold and fine linen, her skin scarred with ritual marks of power, standing on a chariot and staring down the invincible legions of Rome until they literally turned around and went home. This wasn't a fluke of history. It was a systemic recognition that the feminine spirit held a specific type of protective magic that no man could ever replicate, a mother lion energy that kept the empire's heart beating for centuries. This cultural journey into matriarchal power wasn't about equality in the modern sense. It was about cosmic necessity. The Kushites believed that a king's right to rule didn't come from his father, but was transmitted through the royal women, making the Kandake the literal gatekeeper of the divine lineage. She was the one who chose the next pharaoh, acting as the bridge between the ancestors and the living, a role that made her the most powerful person in the Nile Valley, whether she was holding a scepter or a spear. Spiritually, the Kandake was seen as the earthly manifestation of the goddess Isis, the great mother who gathered the pieces of a broken world. When she went to war, she wasn't just defending borders. She was performing a ritual of cleansing, removing the parasites who threatened the sacred balance of the south. They believed her voice carried the weight of the thunder, and her gaze could wither the resolve of an entire army, making her a psychological weapon that the rigid, male-dominated empires of the Mediterranean simply couldn't comprehend. As the legends of these warrior queens echoed across the ancient world, they left a permanent mark on the collective subconscious of the continent, a blueprint for female leadership that still haunts those who prefer a more compliant history. But while these women guarded the gates of the present, the priests in the hidden temples were looking much further back, into a time when the gods themselves walked the earth as men of ebony. This leads us to the most controversial secret of all, the true origin of the Hidden One, and the blue-skinned creator who started it all. It's a bit of a cosmic joke how Western art history loves to paint the gods in pale hues. But if you look at the original blueprints in the temples of Kush, the king of the gods looks more like the midnight sky than a marble statue. Amon-Ra wasn't just a sun god. In the heart of Africa, he was often depicted with skin as blue as the deepest part of the Nile or as black as the fertile silt. This wasn't an artistic choice. It was a literal representation of the infinite, a reminder that the source of all light emerged from a primordial dark womb that the world now tries to bleach out of existence. The mystery of this dark sun lies in the frequency of his power, which the Kushite priests believed could only be channeled through the original bloodline of the south. Imagine a sanctuary where the air is so thick with incense it feels like water, and there, in the absolute center of the darkness, sits a statue of a god whose skin absorbs all light. He wasn't a god you could bargain with or buy off with cheap prayers. He was the Hidden One, the silent force that moved the stars and dictated the rise and fall of empires based on a code of cosmic justice that modern man would find terrifyingly strict. This journey into the original divinity takes us back to a time when the distinction between the human and the divine was as thin as a veil of linen. The Kushites didn't see themselves as worshippers in the modern sense. They saw themselves as the literal extensions of this blue-skinned creator, his hands and feet on the African soil. This cultural identity was so strong that even when the Greeks and Romans tried to adopt Ammon, they had to travel all the way to the Siwa Oasis or Napata to get the real signal, admitting, perhaps with a bit of bruised ego, that the frequency was stronger in the south. Spiritually, the blue skin of the god symbolized the ether, the invisible substance that connects all living things and allows for miracles to manifest in the physical realm. To the initiates of Napata, Black and blue were the colors of potential, the everything from which the nothing of the material world was born. They believed that by meditating on these dark hues, they could bypass the distractions of the flesh and tap into a reservoir of ancestral power that was older than the sun itself, a secret that gave the Black Pharaohs their supernatural resilience. As we stare into the deep indigo eyes of these ancient depictions, we realize that the hidden one was never really hiding. We just lost the ability to see him through the glare of a whitewashed history. But even as this divine energy flowed through the kings and queens, it left behind a trail of physical artifacts. Sacred objects that weren't just art, but high-tech spiritual tools. And among these, none was more feared or misunderstood than the amulet of the two serpents, a device that could allegedly bend time and will. In the high-stakes game of ancient spiritual warfare, the Black Pharaohs didn't rely on luck. They relied on hardware that would make a modern engineer scratch their head in confusion. The amulet of the two serpents wasn't some cheap trinket you'd find in a museum gift shop. It was a calibrated tool of resonance crafted from sky iron and electrum. It's funny how we call these objects jewelry today, probably because it's easier to handle than admitting the ancients might have understood bioenergetics better than we do with all our silicon chips. The mystery of this artifact lies in its rumored ability to act as a spiritual compass, vibrating when the wearer was out of alignment with Ma'at, the cosmic truth. Imagine a king standing on the deck of his warship, the amulet heavy against his chest, pulsing with a low-frequency hum that only he could feel. It was said that the two serpents weren't just carvings, but living conduits that could sense the intentions of everyone in the room, acting like a metaphysical lie detector that made betrayal a very short-lived career path. This journey into sacred technology reveals a culture that didn't see a gap between science and magic. To the Kushite elite, the amulet was a portable anchor for the soul, ensuring that even in the chaos of battle or the poison of a royal court, their frequency remained locked onto the hidden one. It was a cultural safeguard, a way to ensure that the man wearing the crown didn't let the ego of the pharaoh drown out the wisdom of the initiate, a balance we could desperately use in our modern halls of power. Spiritually, the twin serpents represented the dual flow of energy, the lunar and the solar, the breath of life and the fire of destruction, coiled together in perfect tension. The priests believed that by wearing this symbol, the king became a walking 0 point, a neutral observer who could execute divine will without the interference of personal bias. It was a terrifying level of responsibility, suggesting that the amulet wasn't a gift, but a tether that bound the ruler to the consequences of every word he spoke. As we look at the few surviving examples of these talismans, stripped of their context and polished for display, we can't help but wonder if they're still on, waiting for a heartbeat that matches the rhythm of the old empire. But while these objects held the power of the individual, the collective strength of Kush was anchored in something much more massive and immovable. To find it, we must travel to the forbidden archives of Jebel Barkal, where the mountain itself was said to house the original database of the gods. It's almost a riot how archaeologists spend decades digging in the dirt, while the most explosive secrets are literally staring them in the face, disguised as a giant sandstone mountain. Jebel Barkal wasn't just a landmark, it was the hard drive of the Kushite Empire, a natural fortress that the ancients believed housed the original blueprints of creation. The mountain features a massive pinnacle-like rock that looks suspiciously like a giant cobra wearing a crown, a natural formation that the Kushites took very, very seriously, while modern skeptics just call it erosion because the alternative is too scary to think about. The mystery of these forbidden archives lies in the hidden chambers carved deep into the mountain's belly, where the walls are covered in living hieroglyphs that describe things no Bronze Age person should know. Imagine a priest descending into the cool, silent dark, his torchlight revealing complex astronomical maps that track stars the civilized Greeks wouldn't discover for another 1,000 years. This wasn't just history, it was a library of frequencies, a place where the kings of Kush went to recharge their divine mandate by literally standing inside the mountain's resonance. This journey into the stone database shows us a civilization that viewed nature not as something to be conquered, but as a giant piece of technology to be utilized. To the Kushites, the mountain was a resonator, a spiritual amplifier that broadcast the signal of Amun across the entire Nile Valley. This wasn't just religious fluff, it was an early form of mass communication, a way of ensuring that everyone from the delta to the highlands felt the weight of the southern gods, a cultural Wi-Fi that kept the empire unified without the need for a standing army in every village. Spiritually, the mountain was seen as the literal pure mountain, the place where the god first touched the earth. The archives weren't filled with dusty scrolls, but with sound keys, chants and tones that were believed to vibrate the very cells of the body back into health and harmony. They believed that if a king could master the voice of the mountain, he could command the rain, the river, and the hearts of men, making the archive a weapon of mass peace that was far more effective than any iron spear. As we stand at the foot of this silent giant today, the wind whistling through its hollows sounds suspiciously like a code that we've lost the key to decipher. The experts will tell you there's nothing left to find, but the local legends still warn of shadows that move inside the rock when the moon hits a certain angle. But if the mountain was the archive, then the river was the delivery system, and the Nile was about to reveal a secret that would connect the heart of Africa to the stars of the northern sky. Most people think of the Nile as just a big snake of water that provided some decent irrigation, but the Kushites knew better. They saw it as a mirror. It's funny how rational science tries to explain the river's unique northward flow as a mere geological fluke, while the priests of Napata understood it was a deliberate cosmic alignment. They didn't just live by the river, they synchronized their entire civilization to a celestial Nile in the stars, believing that the water beneath their feet was a physical manifestation of the Milky Way, a liquid bridge between the mud and the infinite. The mystery of this watery connection lies in the Great Bend, a massive U-turn the river takes in the heart of Kush that defies simple logic. Imagine a sailor navigating these waters, realizing that for a moment the river flows directly toward the source of life, as if it's trying to return to the heart of the continent. The ancients believed this bend was a reset button for the soul, a place where time itself became fluid and where the laws of the physical world were suspended by the sheer weight of the river's spiritual inertia. This journey along the River of Stars reveals a culture that lived in a permanent state of dual citizenship between earth and heaven. To the Kushites, every cataract was a chakra of the earth, an energy center that needed to be mastered and purified through specific rituals that involved chanting at the water's edge until the river seemed to hum back. This wasn't just folklore. It was an advanced form of hydroacoustics, a way of using the river's natural frequency to broadcast a vibration of stability across a kingdom that stretched for thousands of miles. Spiritually, the Nile was the cooling breath of the blue-skinned creator, a substance that didn't just wash the body, but scrubbed the spirit clean of ancestral debt. They believed that the annual flood wasn't just about silt for crops, but a literal download of new cosmic data, a software update for the planet sent directly from the stars. To drink from the Nile in Kush was to ingest the history of the universe, a reality that made the southern people feel invincible because they were literally made of the same stuff as the gods. As the water continues its relentless journey toward the sea, it carries with it the discarded secrets of a dozen dynasties, buried in the mud and the reeds. But while the river provided the life force, it was a specific ancient lineage that held the remote control for this power, a line of kings whose DNA was said to be different because of a prehistoric encounter in the shadow of the moon. And to understand that, we have to look at the Stargate of the Ancestors, a ritual site that official history refuses to even map. It's almost a riot how modern explorers claim to discover things that have been sitting in plain sight for eons, usually hidden behind the convenient label of ceremonial ruins. In the deep desert reaches beyond the Nile, there are stone circles that make Stonehenge look like a backyard DIY project, aligned with a precision that would make a NASA engineer sweat. The Kushites didn't just look at the sky, they built landing pads for a frequency they called the spirit of the first time, a connection to a prehistoric era that mainstream history prefers to keep under a very heavy rug. The mystery of these sites lies in their acoustic properties. Places where a whisper can be heard a mile away, but only if you're standing in the exact sweet spot of the stone's shadow. Imagine a group of initiates standing under a sky so clear it feels like you're falling into it, waiting for the moment when Sirius or Orion locks into the stone sights like a key in a lock. This wasn't primitive stargazing. It was a cosmic conversation, a way of dialing home to an ancestral source that the Kushites believed resided in the dark matter between the stars. This journey into the stone circuitry reveals a culture that understood the Earth as a giant conductor for celestial energy. To the people of the South, these weren't just rocks, they were antennae, tuned to the specific vibration of their lineage, ensuring the Black Pharaohs never lost their GPS in the messy world of human politics. It's a bit ironic that we use satellites to do what they did with granite and intent, yet we still can't seem to find the same sense of direction they had 3,000 years ago. Spiritually, the Stargate was the place where the Ka, the soul, went to practice for the final journey. They believed that by standing in these energy vortexes, they could thin the veil, allowing the wisdom of the deceased kings to flow back into the living world like a spiritual broadband connection. It was a cultural insurance policy, making sure that the current ruler wasn't just guessing his way through life, but was being remote controlled by the collective intelligence of every lion who had ever worn the crown. As the starlight hits the weathered surfaces of these ancient stones today, they still hold a charge that can scramble a compass or a narrow mind. The gate isn't closed, we've just forgotten how to walk through it without a boarding pass and a smartphone. But even as the Kushites mastered the heavens, they were facing a much more grounded threat, a creeping amnesia brought on by invaders who realized that to kill the people, you first have to kill their connection to the stars. It's truly a masterpiece of irony how the cradle of civilization became the basement of history in the eyes of Western scholars. After the Kushite pharaohs retreated to the south, a systematic campaign of architectural gaslighting began. Statues were decapitated, names were chiseled out, and the Black Pharaohs were rebranded as mere footnotes. It's almost funny, in a dark way, how the world decided to forget an empire that ruled from the Mediterranean to the heart of Africa, simply because their presence didn't fit the narrative of who was allowed to be civilized. The mystery of this erasure isn't in what was lost, but in why it was so aggressively hidden. Imagine a world where the very existence of a technologically superior Black Empire was treated as a glitch in the matrix of history. The invaders didn't just want the gold or the land, they wanted to kill the idea that the source of Nile wisdom came from the south. They smashed the noses off the statues not by accident, but to kill the breath of the ancestors, attempting a spiritual lobotomy on a people whose history was written in stone and fire. This journey through the labyrinth of silence shows us that the most effective way to colonize a mind is to delete its password to the past. The cultural impact of this amnesia was devastating, turning a people who once commanded the stars into curiosities for the colonial gaze. It was a tactical unlearning, where the pyramids of Sudan were dismissed as smaller versions of Egypt's, a bit like calling a diamond a smaller version of a rock. It's technically true, but it misses the entire point of its value. Spiritually, the erasure was an attempt to cut the cord between the living and the great blue god, Amun. By destroying the monuments, the enemies of Kush believed they could stop the signal from reaching the future, leaving the descendants of the pharaohs wandering in a spiritual desert without a map. But they underestimated the stone memory. They forgot that you can't truly erase a frequency that is encoded in the very DNA of the Earth itself, waiting for the right vibration to wake it up again. As we walk through the ruins of Napata today, the silence is so heavy, it's actually loud, a roar of suppressed truth that refuses to stay buried. The great amnesia is finally wearing off, and the side effects are making a lot of traditional historians very uncomfortable. But while the statues were broken, the secret of the unconquerable bloodline was whispered into the ears of the next generation, leading to a hidden resistance that would survive even the Roman eagle. It's hilarious how Hollywood portrays the Roman Empire as this unstoppable juggernaut, yet they conveniently forget the time the invincible legions got their pride handed to them by a one-eyed African queen. When Augustus Caesar's troops decided to push their luck too far south, they weren't expecting to face the Candace Amanirenas, a woman who didn't just protest their arrival, but met them with a hail of iron and a glare that could melt marble. The Romans, in their rigid armor and even more rigid egos, were utterly baffled by a desert army that moved like smoke and struck like a lightning bolt from a clear sky. The mystery of this conflict lies in the head of Augustus, a bronze trophy that the Kushites snatched from an Egyptian city and buried, wait for it, right under the entrance to their temple in Meroe. Imagine the sheer glorious irony. For centuries, every time a Kushite priest or citizen walked into the sanctuary, they were literally stepping on the face of the most powerful man in the world. It was a spiritual grounding of Roman arrogance, a physical ritual of dominance that proved the barbarians of the South had a much more sophisticated sense of humor than the stuffy senators in Rome. This journey into the frontier of fire shows that the Kushite resistance wasn't just about territory, it was a clash of frequencies. Rome was a machine of conquest, but Kush was a sanctuary of the soul, and the desert simply refused to let the machine operate on its sand. The cultural impact of this standoff was massive. It forced Rome to sign a peace treaty that exempted Kush from paying tribute, a rare L for the Caesars that history books usually tuck away in the back pages where nobody looks. Spiritually, this victory was seen as the protection of the mother lioness in action, a manifestation of the goddess Sekhmet defending her original home. The Kushites believed that because they fought for the balance of the earth rather than the vanity of a man, the very heat of the sun became their ally, cooking the Romans in their tin can armor until they begged for the shade of the north. It was a reminder that when you defend the source defends you back with interest. As we look back at this forgotten war, the message is clear. The Black Pharaohs never truly fell. They simply withdrew into a realm where the Roman eagle couldn't follow. But the legacy of this defiance didn't stop at the border. It seeped into the very foundations of the world's most famous religious texts. To find the next piece of the puzzle, we have to look at a figure the world thinks it knows, but whose African secret has been hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years. It's truly a riot how the authorized versions of history try to bleach the desert sand out of the Bible, especially when it comes to the heavy hitters. We're told stories about Moses as if he were wandering through a cultural vacuum, but the text itself, if you have the guts to read the original fine print, mentions his Kushite wife, Zipporah. It's funny how modern scholars get all twitchy about this Ethiopian woman, trying to claim she was just dark-complexioned, rather than admitting that the very foundation of the law was whispered into the ear of a man who was deeply embedded in the black spiritual tradition of the South. The mystery of this connection lies in the wisdom of the Midianites, a group that many occult historians link directly back to the high-tech spiritual schools of Kush. Imagine Moses fleeing the fast food spirituality of the Egyptian court, only to find the real, raw frequency of God in the tent of a Kushite priest king. This wasn't a random meeting, it was a return to the source, where the secrets of the burning bush, a manifestation of the African fire god, were revealed to a man whose bloodline was being recoded by the southern sun. This journey into scriptural smuggling reveals that the Exodus wasn't just a move of people, but a transfer of technology. The Ark of the Covenant, with its specific dimensions and gold overlay, bears a suspicious resemblance to the sacred barks used by the priests of Napata to carry the signal of Amun. It's a cultural theft of the highest order, where the rituals of the African interior were repackaged for a new audience, while the original authors were quietly ushered out of the credits of the world's most famous book. Spiritually, the presence of the Kushite lineage in the foundational stories of the West acts like a time bomb of truth. They believed that the spirit of the South was a protective mantle that ensured the message wouldn't be lost to the corruption of the North. Zipporah wasn't just a wife, she was a spiritual anchor, a Kandake of the wilderness who performed the rituals that Moses, who had spent too much time in the Egyptian palace, had forgotten or never knew, saving his life through an ancient bloody covenant that the modern church would rather not talk about at Sunday school. As we peel back the layers of these ancient scrolls, we find that the Black Presence isn't a guest star. It's the director of the play. The fingerprints of Kush are all over the tablets of the law, suggesting that the God of Israel was speaking with a distinctly southern accent. But while these secrets were being woven into the texts of the North, the original guardians of the flame were preparing for a different kind of survival, one that would involve hiding their most sacred city in a place where no map could ever find it. There is a particular kind of irony in the way historians talk about abandoned cities, as if a civilization just misplaced its keys and walked away. Napata, the first capital of the Kushite kings, didn't just crumble, it performed a vanishing act. It's quite a joke to think that a city so central to the world's gold trade and spiritual architecture could simply fade, unless you understand that the Kushites were masters of the strategic retreat. They knew that when the frequency of a place is compromised by invaders, you don't stay to fight for the ruins, vocally or physically. You move the signal somewhere else. The mystery of Napata lies in its ruins, which seem to vibrate with a residual energy that still interferes with modern surveying equipment. Imagine a city where the temples were carved directly into the living rock, designed to act as resonators for a ritual that could supposedly control the rise of the Nile. When the kings moved their seat to Meroe, they didn't leave Napata empty. They left it guarded by a priesthood that lived in the shadows, keeping the sacred fires burning long after the world thought the city had become a tomb for the desert wind. This journey into the spirit of the move reveals a culture that understood that power isn't in the bricks, but in the lineage. The cultural impact of Napata's ghost status was profound. It became a forbidden zone, a place of pilgrimage that only the initiated could enter under the cover of the new moon. While the Romans and later explorers looked for a city of gold, they were standing right on top of it, unable to see the entrance because their minds weren't tuned to the right wavelength of the African landscape. Spiritually, the abandonment of Napata was a ritual of preservation, a saving of the seed. The Kushites believed that by letting the desert reclaim the physical structures, they were protecting the spiritual archives from being looted by the profane minds of the north. They saw the sand not as a destroyer, but as a protective blanket, a golden veil that would keep the throne of Amun pure until a generation arrived that was worthy of uncovering it without the intent of theft. As the sun sets over the jagged silhouette of Jebel Barkal, the shadows of the temples seem to stretch out like long, dark fingers, reaching for a future they already knew was coming. The ghost city remains a silent witness to the fact that you can't truly conquer a people who are comfortable in the invisible realms. But while Napata slept, the iron smelters of the south were preparing for a different kind of fire, one that would spread the Kushite DNA into the very heart of the continent, creating the foundations for the great empires of West Africa. It's a bit of a laugh how traditional history books treat the fall of Kush as if the people just evaporated into thin air, leaving nothing behind but some broken pottery. In reality, what we're looking at is the world's most successful rebranding campaign. When the furnaces of Meroe finally cooled, the mastersmiths and priests didn't just wait for the end. They packed up their ironworking secrets and their sacred geometry and headed west. It's funny how historians act surprised when they find Kushite-style iron tools and social structures in West Africa, as if the concept of walking hadn't been invented yet. The mystery of this great migration lies in the Spirit Trail, a series of cultural breadcrumbs stretching across the Sahel. Imagine a caravan of initiates carrying the sacred fire of Amun in ceramic jars, crossing the harsh interior to find a new home away from the prying eyes of the Mediterranean empires. They weren't refugees, they were seeds of a civilization being sown into the fertile ground of the Niger River Valley, ensuring that the technology of the pharaohs would live on in the masks and the bronze-casting traditions of the If and Benin. This journey into the heart of the continent reveals that the Black Pharaohs didn't lose their empire, they simply changed its address. The cultural impact was a massive software update for the interior of Africa, where the divine kingship model of Kush was adapted into new forms. It's a bit ironic that people talk about the Mali Empire or the Songhai as if they popped out of nowhere, when the DNA of their governance and their obsession with gold and cosmic order screams Kushite legacy to anyone who isn't blinded by colonial labels. Spiritually, the migration was seen as the flight of the phoenix. The priests believed that the sun must set in the east to rise in the west, and so the move was a holy necessity to keep the light of Africa from being extinguished by the encroaching shadows of the north. They believed that by spreading the lineage, they were making the unconquerable bloodline impossible to target, a decentralized spiritual network that could survive any invasion because its server was now hidden in a dozen different kingdoms across the continent. As we trace the lineage of the great West African kings, we find the same lion energy that once roared in Napata, proving that the eclipse was only temporary. The migration wasn't an end, but a strategic distribution of power that would wait in the shadows of the rainforest for centuries. But as this power settled into its new homes, a strange phenomenon began to occur. The star knowledge of the Nile began to manifest in the myths of people like the Dogon, revealing a cosmic secret that would baffle modern scientists thousands of years later. It's almost a riot how expert astronomers were baffled when they found out a tribe in Mali knew more about the Sirius star system than the guys with the multi-million-dollar telescopes. The Dogon people, living in the jagged cliffs of Bandiagara, possessed a secret knowledge of a white dwarf star, Sirius B, that is invisible to the naked eye. It's funny how the scientific community tried to claim they learned it from travelers, as if a wandering tourist just happened to carry around complex orbital diagrams of invisible stars in their back pocket. In reality, this was the final data backup from the Kushite priests, hidden in the heart of West Africa, where the civilized world wouldn't think to look. The mystery of this paradox lies in the Nomo, the amphibious beings from the stars that the Dogon myths describe. Imagine a group of Kushite initiates, survivors of the Great Westward Migration, translating the high-tech star maps of Jebel Barkal into the poetic language of local folklore. This wasn't primitive myth-making. It was an elaborate encryption system designed to preserve the Nile frequency across generations of oral tradition. The Dogon didn't just know about the star. They knew its density, its orbital period, and its spiritual significance, secrets that are a direct copy-paste from the inner sanctums of Napata. This journey into stellar heritage proves that the Black Pharaohs weren't just kings of land, but masters of the celestial internet. Ido, the cultural impact of this knowledge is a slap in the face to the idea of the isolated African interior. It shows a continent connected by an invisible thread of high-level science, where the cliffs of Mali and the pyramids of Sudan were part of the same cosmic conversation. It's a bit ironic that we call it discovery, when we finally build a machine that confirms what the ancestors have been dancing about for 3,000 years. Spiritually, the Dogon paradox is the living evidence of the immortal African soul. The priests believed that as long as the knowledge of the stars was kept alive in the songs and rituals of the people, the bridge to the ancestors would never be truly broken. They saw the invisible star as a symbol of their own history, small, hidden from the arrogant gaze of the world, but incredibly heavy and possessing a gravity that keeps everything else in orbit. It was a spiritual insurance policy that guaranteed the lineage would always have a way to find its way back home, even in the dark. As we look at the intricate masks and sand drawings of the Dogon today, we realize we're not looking at folk art, but at a legacy of deep space physics rendered in wood and clay. The message from the Nile reached its destination, proving that the unconquerable bloodline had successfully outmaneuvered the amnesia of time. But the story doesn't end in the cliffs. It leads us back to the present day, where the hidden pharaoh is no longer a person, but a rising consciousness in a world that is finally waking up to the truth. It is the ultimate irony that after thousands of years of trying to bury, bleach, and rebrand the legacy of the Black Pharaohs, the truth is bubbling up through the cracks of the 21st century like pressurized oil. Modern genetics and satellite imagery are doing what the lion kings of Kush always knew they would, proving that you can't kill a frequency by smashing a statue. It's funny how the experts act surprised to find that the spirit of Napata didn't die. It just went into a long-term stealth mode, waiting for a generation that was no longer afraid of its own shadow to reclaim the throne of the mind. The mystery of this final stage isn't found in a tomb, but in the bioarchive of the African diaspora. Imagine a world where the hidden pharaoh isn't a man sitting on a chair of gold, but a collective awakening of millions of people who are suddenly remembering a history they were never taught. This isn't a conspiracy theory, it's a spiritual resonance, a biological ping from the ancestors that is being felt in the music, the politics, and the defiant stares of a people who are tired of playing the role of side characters in a story they actually started. This journey into the modern pharaoh reveals that the real empire was never about the land, but about the Ma'at, the cosmic order. The cultural impact today is a seismic shift in identity, where the sun-kissed lineage is realizing that their ancestors didn't just build pyramids, they built a psychological fortress that could survive the great amnesia. It's a bit ironic that the very technology used to erase them, the global internet, is now the primary tool for their resurrection, as the images of Meroe and the secrets of the Kandake's go viral, bypassing the gatekeepers of traditional academia. Spiritually, this awakening is the return of the blue god to the conscious mind. The ancient priests believed that time was a circle, and that the hidden one would emerge once more when the world became too heavy with the chaos of the north. They saw this era as a period of alchemical restoration, where the red earth of Africa would once again become the focal point for a global shift in human consciousness. A reality where the source is no longer ignored, but sought after as the only cure for a world that has lost its soul. As we close this cycle of 20 secrets, the silence of the desert is finally being broken by the roar of a history that refuses to be forgotten. The Black Pharaohs are no longer hidden. They are the very air we breathe and the rhythm of the future we are building. The unconquerable bloodline has finished its long march through the shadows, and as the sun hits the pinnacle of Jebel Barkal once more, the throne is no longer empty. The sands of the Sudan do not just cover stones, they guard a heartbeat. As the sun sets behind the jagged peaks of Meroe, casting shadows that look like the crowns of forgotten kings, we realize that the story of the Black Pharaohs was never truly buried. It was merely waiting for a generation with the courage to see in the dark. These ancient rulers, these masters of iron and starlight, left us a map that isn't drawn on papyrus, but encoded in our very resilience. They prove that no matter how hard the world tries to delete your greatness or rewrite your origins, the truth of the source is as immovable as the mountain of Jebel Barkal. The hidden pharaoh isn't just a figure from the past, it is the rising consciousness of a people reclaiming their place in the cosmic order. We leave this sacred space of history not with a conclusion, but with a beginning. The desert is whispering again, and the ancestors are watching to see what we do with the light they fought so hard to preserve. If you felt the weight of these ancient secrets and want to continue walking this path of forbidden history, make sure to subscribe and turn on all notifications. The next revelation is already stirring beneath the dust.